Most people think power announces itself. It raises its voice. It demands obedience. It forces outcomes. That belief is the reason they never touch real power. Because the most decisive force in any room is never visible. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't argue. It doesn't explain. It simply moves people quietly, while they believe they chose on their own. And the moment you start looking for power in what is loud, obvious, or aggressive, you guarantee that someone else is already controlling the situation from the shadows. If this feels abstract, don't skip ahead. The people who do are the same ones who mistake noise for authority. Stay. Because what you're about to hear was never meant to be obvious, only effective. The first mistake people make about power is assuming it must be seen to exist. They look for it in titles, volume, confidence, and dominance displays. They believe control requires pressure. That influence requires assertion. But visible power is fragile by design. The louder it becomes, the more resistance it generates. Every command creates friction. Every demand invites defiance. And the more force you apply, the more energy you waste maintaining the illusion that you're in charge. Think about the people who constantly remind others of their authority. They reference their position, their experience, their right to decide. That behavior isn't strength, it's compensation. Real power doesn't need reminders because it isn't negotiated. The moment authority must be explained, it has already weakened. Explanation signals dependency on agreement, and agreement is the enemy of control. Visible dominance works only in the short term. It exhausts the system it relies on. People comply outwardly, but resist internally. They wait, they delay, they undermine. They follow instructions in the least effective way possible. On the surface, it looks like obedience. Underneath, it's sabotage disguised as cooperation. Force creates enemies, even when it wins. This is why the most effective operators rarely appear powerful at all. They don't rush to assert. They don't fill silence. They don't react emotionally to challenge. Their presence is calm, almost unremarkable. And yet, decisions bend toward them. Conversations shift when they speak. Outcomes align with their interests, without them ever needing to demand it. Centuries ago, observers of power noticed this pattern long before psychology gave it a name. One of them was Niccolò Machiavelli, not because he glorified cruelty, but because he understood perception. He saw that force attracts resistance, while subtle influence reshapes behavior from the inside. What appears passive is often strategic restraint. The problem is that modern culture trains people to admire visible strength. Loud confidence is rewarded. Assertiveness is praised. Silence is mistaken for weakness. But this conditioning blinds people to the real mechanism at work. They focus on who speaks the most, not who shapes the outcome. They watch the actor on stage and miss the hand adjusting the lights. This illusion creates a dangerous trap. People who rely on visible power become predictable. They respond the same way every time. Pressure for pressure, force for force. And predictability is the one thing power cannot afford. Once your reactions are known, they can be managed. Once your patterns are clear, they can be used against you. Real power avoids this trap entirely. It doesn't compete on the surface. It doesn't announce itself. It operates underneath behavior, nudging decisions, shaping expectations, and guiding movement without confrontation. This is what most people never learn to recognize, because they're too busy watching what's obvious. And until you understand how this invisible force works, you will always mistake authority for control and miss the hand that's actually moving everything. Once you stop looking at power as something that must be displayed, a different pattern becomes visible. Influence does not push behavior. It arranges incentives, so behavior moves on its own. People believe they are acting freely, but their choices are being gently guided by forces they never notice. This is the invisible hand of power. It doesn't block paths. It reshapes which paths feel natural to take. The human mind hates friction. It seeks the path of least resistance, the option that feels safest, easiest, and most socially acceptable. Real power understands this and works with psychology rather than against it. Instead of demanding loyalty, it makes disloyalty uncomfortable. Instead of commanding action, it makes inaction costly. When people move in your direction without realizing why, you are no longer persuading, you are positioning. This is where most people fail. They argue, they explain, they convince. All of those methods require energy and invite opposition. The invisible hand uses none of them. It sets conditions. It controls timing. It limits options without ever appearing to. When someone believes they chose freely, they defend that choice aggressively, even if it benefits you more than them. Look closely at environments where decisions seem obvious. The meeting where one proposal just made sense. The relationship where one person always compromises first. The group that naturally looks to the same individual before acting. None of this happens by accident. Someone shaped the context. Someone controlled the flow of information. Someone decided what would feel reasonable before anyone spoke. This principle was understood long before modern behavioral science. Niccolò Machiavelli observed that people rarely act based on truth. They act based on perception. And perception is easier to guide than force. You don't need to control people directly if you control what they believe is possible, acceptable, or inevitable. The invisible hand works through absence as much as presence. What is not said, what is not reacted to, what is delayed. Silence creates space, and space invites projection. People fill gaps with their own assumptions, often harsher or more favorable than anything you could say. By withholding, you allow others to do the mental work for you, and they believe the conclusions are theirs. This is why reacting emotionally destroys leverage. Emotion collapses distance. It exposes priorities. It reveals pressure points. The invisible hand requires restraint. When you do not rush to correct, defend, or dominate, you remain unreadable. And unreadable individuals are difficult to manipulate. People slow down around them. They become cautious. They second-guess themselves. Control shifts without a word being spoken. At this stage, power no longer looks like dominance. It looks like inevitability. People align with you not because they are forced to, but because resisting feels pointless or uncomfortable. This is the highest form of influence, when opposition never fully forms. And once you understand this mechanism, you stop chasing authority and start shaping environments instead. Because whoever controls the conditions never needs to control the people. Once the environment is shaped, force becomes unnecessary. This is the illusion most people never escape. They think power is something you apply, but real control is something you remove. You remove resistance. You remove alternatives. You remove emotional volatility. What remains is compliance that feels voluntary. When nothing pushes back, movement appears natural. Force always creates friction. Friction creates awareness. Awareness creates opposition. The moment people feel pushed, they begin to resist, even if the direction benefits them. This is why overt authority decays over time. The more loudly it speaks, the more it trains people to push back. Control without force avoids this trap entirely by never triggering the instinct to rebel. The key mechanism here is option compression. People believe freedom comes from having many choices, but psychologically, the opposite is true. Too many options create anxiety. Anxiety pushes people toward the option that feels safest, the option that appears socially validated, low risk, or already in motion. When you subtly narrow the field, people thank you for clarity while walking exactly where you want them to go. This is why powerful figures rarely argue publicly. They let others exhaust themselves. They let time do the damage. While everyone else burns energy trying to dominate the moment, they focus on positioning for the outcome. Silence is not weakness here. It is patience weaponized. Time amplifies asymmetry. Those who rush reveal need. Those who wait appear inevitable. This dynamic was central to the thinking of Niccolò Machiavelli. He understood that stability comes not from constant enforcement, but from shaping expectations. When people expect a certain outcome, they align with it in advance. Control is strongest when it operates through anticipation rather than correction. Notice how this plays out in everyday interactions. The person who never raises their voice, yet ends debates with a single sentence. The leader who rarely gives direct orders, yet whose preferences are always anticipated. The individual whose approval is never requested, but quietly sought. None of them demand obedience. They simply make alignment the most comfortable option. This requires emotional discipline. If you react impulsively, you collapse the structure you are building. Control without force depends on predictability of principles and unpredictability of responses. People must know where you stand, but never know exactly how you will move. This uncertainty forces caution. Caution slows aggression. Slowness creates advantage. At this level, power stops looking dramatic. There are no confrontations, no ultimatums, no visible victories. Things simply resolve in your favor more often than not. People adjust before conflict arises. Problems dissolve early. Resistance never fully forms, and that is the mark of true control. Not domination after the fact, but alignment before it becomes necessary. Visibility feels powerful, but it is often a trap. The more visible you are, the easier you are to measure. The easier you are to measure, the easier you are to predict. And predictability is the enemy of power. True influence operates best when its source is unclear, when outcomes happen, but no single hand can be blamed or challenged. Invisibility does not mean absence, it means indirect presence. Your impact is felt, but your intentions remain ambiguous. People sense movement without seeing the mover. This creates hesitation. Hesitation buys time. Time creates leverage. When others cannot clearly identify where pressure is coming from, they argue with each other instead of confronting you. Most people crave recognition. They want credit. They want validation. That craving pushes them into the spotlight and into danger. The invisible operator lets others take the stage while quietly shaping what happens behind it. When success arrives, others are praised. When failure appears, it lands somewhere else. This asymmetry protects you while expanding your influence. This is why subtlety outperforms dominance. Loud power invites coalitions. Quiet power fractures them. When people cannot point to you as the source of control, they cannot unite against you. They suspect each other instead. Distrust spreads horizontally, never vertically toward you. You remain above the conflict, untouched by its consequences. Invisibility also protects optionality. The moment you declare a position publicly, you lock yourself into defending it. The invisible hand stays flexible. It allows you to reverse course without humiliation, to adapt without explanation, to change tactics without appearing inconsistent. Others must justify themselves. You simply adjust. This is where restraint becomes a weapon. You resist the urge to comment. You resist the urge to clarify. You resist the urge to claim ownership. Each act of restraint deepens uncertainty around you. People begin to project competence, intelligence, and authority onto the silence. They assume there is more than they can see, and they act accordingly. There is also a psychological effect at play. Humans fear what they cannot read, not openly, but subconsciously. An unreadable individual disrupts social calibration. People do not know how to perform around them. They become cautious with words. They hesitate before acting. That hesitation gives you space to move first, or not move at all, which is often stronger. When you master invisibility, you stop competing for attention and start controlling outcomes. You no longer need to dominate conversations or assert authority. Influence arrives quietly, disguised as consensus, timing, or inevitability. And because no one sees you coming, no one prepares to stop you. Power doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it simply arrives, and everyone else adjusts. At the highest level, power no longer needs to move. Others move first. Resistance fades before it fully forms. Outcomes resolve themselves in your favor, not because you force them, but because opposing them feels irrational. This is what it means to make power feel inevitable. When inevitability is established, conflict becomes unnecessary, and unnecessary conflict is always avoided by intelligent people. Inevitability is not created through dominance. It is created through consistency of positioning over time. People observe patterns long before they articulate conclusions. When they see that things tend to resolve around you, that alignment with you is rewarded, and that opposing you leads nowhere, they internalize the lesson. Eventually, they stop testing the boundary altogether. This is why the most powerful individuals rarely celebrate victories. Celebration signals relief. Relief implies uncertainty before the outcome, but inevitability leaves no room for surprise. When success appears expected, it reinforces the perception that things could not have gone any other way. Your calm after success matters more than the success itself. To build this perception, you must manage three variables simultaneously: timing, restraint, and selective action. You do not respond to everything. You respond only when response compounds advantage. Every unnecessary reaction weakens inevitability. Every delayed move that still succeeds strengthens it. People begin to associate your silence with outcomes, and that association is dangerous in the best way. This understanding traces back to Machiavelli, who recognized that fear and respect are not created by constant action, but by controlled unpredictability paired with stable results. When people cannot anticipate your moves but can anticipate your success, they stop trying to interfere. They adapt instead. Notice how inevitability alters social dynamics. People start pre-aligning with you. They adjust language before you speak. They soften resistance before you arrive. They frame decisions in ways that already favor your interests. This is not loyalty, it is strategic adaptation. And adaptation is more reliable than loyalty because it does not depend on emotion. At this level, power becomes self-reinforcing. Each outcome strengthens expectation. Each expectation reduces resistance. Reduced resistance increases efficiency. Efficiency accelerates results. The loop tightens quietly. No announcements, no threats, no displays, just momentum that feels too heavy to stop. And here is the final distinction. This is not about controlling people. It is about controlling conditions so well that people control themselves in your favor. When power feels inevitable, you no longer need to assert it. You simply maintain position and let gravity do the work. That is the invisible hand fully realized. Influence without friction, authority without noise, control without force.